I was halfway through my third coffee of the morning, staring at the faint steam twisting above my cup, when she walked in. The bell over the door chimed like it always does, but somehow it sounded softer when she appeared. Mid-40s, I'd guess, though her face didn't carry the usual kind of age, more like a patience earned through small, deliberate choices. She scanned the room slowly, not like she was looking for anyone, exactly, but like she was seeing everything all at once. I looked down at the table, fiddling with the napkin I'd folded into a loose triangle. My thumb traced the crease without purpose, just a quiet loop to fill the silence. She found an empty seat across from the window, 2 tables down from me, and set her bag down with a subtle weight, like she was settling into the world for a moment. Our eyes met once, long enough for me to notice the small crinkle near her eyes when she smiled, but I quickly looked away, focusing on my coffee. It was foolish. I knew it. But there was something in the way she let her gaze drift elsewhere, the faint tilt of her head, that made it feel like a private gesture just for me. The barista brought over my usual, unasked, and I realized she had already noticed my order weeks ago, though we'd never exchanged names. That small recognition tugged at something I couldn't name, like being remembered without needing to be asked. I wondered if she knew the half-written text still sitting in my drafts, the one I never sent because the words didn't feel enough. She laughed quietly at something on her phone. Just a short, unassuming sound. And then she looked up, flicking her eyes toward her hands on the table, as if aware of me noticing. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words refused. I just nodded, or maybe it was a half-smile. My attention kept looping back to the delicate line of her jaw, the careful way she adjusted her sleeve. When the coffee shop emptied a bit, she gathered her things slowly. I felt the urge to speak, even as the air thickened with ordinary noises, the whir of the espresso machine, the scrape of chairs on tile. "Hey," she said, almost softly, as if checking whether I'd hear. My throat went dry before I could answer. She leaned slightly closer, just enough that I caught the faint scent of her perfume, something earthy, almost like rain on stone. "Promise you won't tell anyone," she murmured. Her voice was a whisper that didn't need secrecy, but carried it anyway. I blinked, my mouth open, but no words came. My hands twitched against the napkin, my fingers curling and uncurling like they had a language she could read. She smiled, then turned toward the door, leaving the unfinished sentence hanging in the air. I sat frozen, my coffee cooling, watching the sunlight shift across her back. The world had moved on, but my thoughts kept circling the same line she'd left dangling, what she hadn't said, what she meant by it, and why it had settled into me like a weight I wasn't ready to name. I wanted to follow, to ask, to break the spell, but I didn't. I just waited for the bell to ring again, wondering if it ever would, and if the next time it did, she'd be holding the answer in her hand. I didn't see her for a few days, and when I finally ran into her in the lobby of our building, she was juggling grocery bags like it was a full-time job. I offered to help, and she hesitated just long enough for me to notice a flicker of pride, or maybe doubt, before nodding. "Thanks," she said, not looking at me directly, just shifting a bag to my arm. "It's been a weird week." I wanted to ask what she meant but stopped myself. Instead, I carried the bag up the stairs, noticing how her apartment smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old books. There was a quiet order to everything, but nothing too stiff. She brewed tea while I stood awkwardly by the counter, pretending to inspect a shelf. When she handed me a cup, our fingers brushed lightly. I felt it for longer than it should have lasted, the warmth of her skin against mine. "I used to come here when my son was little," she said suddenly, nodding toward the window. "He loved watching people. Said it was like reading a story." I didn't know what to say. It wasn't small talk, but it wasn't heavy either. Just, true. Sounds like he was observant. He was. "Still is," she added, more quietly this time, tracing the rim of her cup with a finger. "Divorced parents, you know the usual chaos." I nodded. I did know. And I felt the weight of it, our connection, already dangerous in its quiet way. Not forbidden exactly, but fragile, lined with unspoken rules and gaps in time. We sat in silence for a while, sipping tea, listening to the soft hum of the heater. My mind kept circling. What if I said something? What if she said something? I imagined scenarios that would never happen, walking home together, sitting side by side in the park, laughing at nothing. Each image made my chest tighten and my palms sweat. She glanced at me, eyes narrowing slightly, a small, knowing smile tugging at her lips. I wanted to ask if I was imagining things, but again, I stayed quiet. Words had a way of ruining delicate balances. Finally, she stood and went to the sink, rinsing her cup. I moved to help, and our hands touched again, this time intentionally, not by accident. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers lingered against mine for a heartbeat, and I caught the faintest flicker of something unspoken. A joke, maybe? Or a test? I couldn't tell. I just smiled, a little stiffly, as if acknowledging a secret we weren't ready to name. Careful, she said lightly, still holding my hand. You might start thinking this is normal. I laughed, low and nervous, and she pulled her hand back slowly, letting the moment breathe before it disappeared. But the warmth stayed, lingering in the air between us, and I knew I'd be replaying it long after I left. I found her on the balcony that evening, staring at the city lights like she was memorizing every flicker. I leaned against the doorway, hands in my pockets, unsure if I was intruding. You're late, she said softly, not looking at me. Her voice carried no accusation, just observation. Traffic, I said, though the truth was I'd paused on the stairs, thinking about whether I should come at all. She shrugged, sipping her wine. The glass caught the last light of the sunset, and for a moment, I could have sworn she looked younger than her years, fragile in a way that made me ache to protect. We stood there in silence, watching the city breathe below us. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words felt inadequate. Instead, I reached for the railing, and she glanced at my hand, our fingers almost touching over the cool metal. She didn't move away, but she didn't move closer either. I started, but stopped. My throat suddenly tight, as though the words would shatter something delicate. She turned, her gaze catching mine for just a heartbeat, and I realized she was holding herself back. Pulling away, not from me exactly, but from the possibility of what I wanted her to be. Your friend called, she said suddenly, glancing at her phone on the table behind her. He mentioned seeing you downtown yesterday. Thought you'd be busy. My stomach sank. Not a confrontation, just a reminder that our small orbit wasn't private. That someone else existed, noticing, expecting. I nodded, letting her shift back to her wine. We lingered together anyway, the air thick with the unsaid. I watched the faint twitch of her fingers along the rim of the glass, the way her eyes caught the last streaks of sunlight, the small exhale she didn't bother to disguise. I never thought I'd see someone like you here, she murmured, voice low, almost to herself. Not that it matters, I stepped a fraction closer, heart pounding. Her words hung in the space between us, incomplete, like a door left ajar. I imagined finishing the sentence for her, letting the vulnerability slip out in a whisper or a touch. For a moment, I leaned in. She tilted her head slightly, and I thought she might meet me halfway. Time stretched. I could feel her breath, faint and steady, and my chest tightened. The balcony, the city, the wine, all of it shrank to the space between our faces. Then her phone buzzed again. She jumped just slightly, breaking the spell, reaching for it with a quiet apology in her eyes. The moment dissolved, leaving me standing too close, feeling the echo of what almost happened. We exchanged a brief, awkward smile, and I stepped back, hands brushing against my pockets again. The city lights seemed sharper now, almost accusing, and I realized that nothing about this was simple, or safe. But I couldn't stop myself from thinking of that near touch, that nearly uttered confession, and how heavy it felt in my chest. I found her sitting on the park bench near the corner where the fountain caught the last of the afternoon light. Her bag rested at her feet, shoes dusty from the walk. She wasn't reading or scrolling, just looking at the water ripple, fingers tracing invisible patterns on her jeans. I hesitated before sitting beside her. "Hey," I said softly. "Hey," she replied, voice lighter than I expected, but not fully warm. Her shoulder brushed mine ever so slightly, just enough that I felt it, but not enough to be certain it meant anything. We watched the fountain in silence. Somewhere behind us, a child laughed, a dog barked, but it all felt distant, like we were wrapped in our own muted world. "I saw you with someone yesterday," she said finally, not looking at me. Her voice trembled a little, almost imperceptibly. I stiffened, unsure whether to defend myself or let her words hang. I said nothing, and she kept speaking. "It was strange. I thought I knew you, I guess." She exhaled sharply, then blinked away a small, guilty smile. I don't know why that made me uneasy. I realized then that this was more than curiosity, something was breaking inside her. Something protective, or jealous, or afraid. My own chest tightened. I wanted to explain, to reach out, but I felt a quiet hesitation, like touching her wrong could shatter everything. "I shouldn't," she started, then paused, fingers curling around the edge of the bench. She finally looked at me, eyes sharp but vulnerable. "I shouldn't care like this. But I do." I swallowed hard, unsure if I should speak. My hand twitched at my side. I wanted to say, "I feel it too," but the words felt too simple for the storm in my chest. Instead, I leaned slightly closer, close enough that our knees almost touched. She noticed, and her gaze softened, though it carried a flicker of warning. "It's complicated," she whispered. "You shouldn't be here, or—" "I shouldn't," she broke off, blinking rapidly, trying to sort out what she felt. "I know," I said, finally letting the words out, quiet but deliberate. "I don't want to make it worse." She exhaled, leaning back slightly, the tension in her shoulders loosening just enough that I could see the fracture beneath her calm exterior. Her hand hovered over mine for a heartbeat, not quite touching, but lingering in possibility. We sat that way for a few more moments, listening to the park breathe, the fountain spilling small white arcs into the basin. The air was calm, but charged with something fragile, unspoken, and entirely ours. Finally, she turned her head, looking at the fountain again. "I can't tell you what to feel," she murmured, almost to herself. "But, be careful." I nodded, understanding that this was both a warning and a promise. I left the bench feeling the weight of the near confession between us, and the quiet ache of knowing that everything had shifted, but nothing was resolved. I didn't see her for nearly a week. Not in the lobby, not in the hallway, not even from the corner of my eye through the mailroom window. The coffee shop, once predictable, felt strange without her there, as if the space itself remembered her absence and refused to fill it. When we finally ran into each other, it was brief. She was walking past, phone pressed to her ear, a faint frown creasing her forehead. I called her name softly, but she didn't turn. Not at first. By the time she did, she gave me a quick, tight smile, the kind that feels polite but carries a subtle weight. "Busy week," she said, more statement than greeting. "Yeah, you too." My words stumbled. She nodded, moving past me with a stiffness I hadn't seen before. Something had shifted, but I couldn't name it. Later, I found the reason tucked into a small, forgotten detail. I saw a photo of her son on her kitchen counter when I stopped by to return a book she'd left in my mailbox. He looked older than I expected, a reminder that her life existed far outside of the small orbit we'd been circling. And then I noticed an envelope beside it, marked with someone else's name. Her ex, maybe. A birthday invitation. A reminder of responsibilities I didn't share. I texted her that night, brief and careful, "Saw the book, hope you're well." No reply. I imagined her reading it, pausing, deciding not to respond. I imagined her telling herself she shouldn't, and somewhere in that restraint was a weight I couldn't lift. My chest ached in quiet frustration, caught between wanting to reach out and fearing I'd overstep. The next day, I stopped by the lobby again, hoping for a casual encounter. She wasn't there. Her neighbor's package had been left outside her door, but she hadn't retrieved it. Her absence gnawed at me more than her presence ever had. I tried to carry on, keeping busy, but every routine reminded me of her. I brewed coffee and poured too much cream. I lingered by my mail slot, hoping a note might appear. I rehearsed conversations that would never happen. Then, late one night, I opened my phone to the unsent text. I missed the way we. I deleted it. Not because I didn't mean it, but because I wasn't sure if it would fix anything, or break everything. I left her apartment door unopened, her seat by the window empty. The echo of the week hung between us like the quiet space after a phone call ended, a space neither of us could cross without risking something fragile. I went to bed with the weight of not knowing pressing against my chest. The quiet tension lingered, and the city outside moved on without permission, leaving me suspended in the small orbit of her absence, waiting for a day I didn't know would come. She opened the door before I could knock, as if she'd been expecting me, or maybe hoping I wouldn't come at all. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee and linen, the way it always did when she'd tidied up and left just enough disorder to feel lived in. "Hey," I said, voice low. "Hey," she replied, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, hands clasped loosely in front of her. Her eyes held a careful balance, vulnerability and restraint, all at once. We stepped inside, lingering near the doorway, neither of us moving forward or back. I wanted to speak, to unravel the week of absence, the unspoken texts, the quiet ache of missing her. But words felt fragile, like porcelain in a storm. She gestured toward the kitchen. "Want some tea?" I nodded, following her. She busied herself with the kettle, moving with habitual grace, and I watched, the way her hands adjusted the tea bag, the soft tilt of her head, the subtle bite of her lip when she concentrated. I started, then stopped. The sound of the boiling water seemed louder than it should, echoing the hesitation that had built between us for days. She turned, watching me, eyes steady but not demanding. "You can say it," she whispered. I swallowed. I don't know if I should. "Then say it anyway." Her voice was calm, almost soft, but carried weight. The kind that made silence impossible. I took a slow breath, finally stepping closer, careful but deliberate. "I've been thinking about you. Every day. Not just when you're here." My hands twisted at my sides, unsure if the words were enough, or too much. Her gaze softened, shoulders releasing a tension I hadn't realized she was holding. "I've been thinking about you too," she admitted quietly, almost a confession, almost a surrender. "Even when I shouldn't." The kettle clicked off. Steam curled around us, filling the small kitchen with warmth. She handed me a cup, fingers brushing mine briefly, deliberately. That small contact held all the weight of everything we hadn't said, the absent week, the unsent texts, the near moments we'd almost crossed. I smiled, careful, tentative. She mirrored it, lips curving softly, eyes holding mine without needing words. In that simple gesture, the distance shrank, not erased, but acknowledged. "Okay," she said finally, voice soft, almost a sigh. A simple human connection, not a promise of forever, but a quiet acknowledgement that we had reached each other, here and now, and that it was enough for this moment. I nodded, holding the cup between us, letting the warmth seep into my palms, into the space between us, into the quiet understanding that some confessions didn't need grand declarations, they only needed the courage to be spoken, and the patience to be received. Weeks passed. Not in leaps, but in small, measured moments, the way sunlight drifts through a window over time, unnoticed until you finally pause and realize how much has changed. I found her on the park bench again, the same one near the fountain where we had first dared to touch possibility. It was early, just past 8:47 a.m., and the city was still stretching awake. She held a cup of black coffee in both hands, the steam curling upward like a private signal. "Morning," I said softly, careful not to break the fragile rhythm we'd built. She smiled, just a slight tilt of her lips, enough to carry warmth without demanding anything. "Morning." We sipped in silence, watching the water catch the first streaks of sunlight. Nothing needed to be said. She remembered my order, the way I like my coffee slightly bitter, the crease in my favorite napkin from the cafe. I remembered how she always let the tea bag steep a fraction longer, and how she laughed quietly when she thought no one was listening. The city moved around us, but the space between us felt steady now, filled with something earned, trust, patience, and the quiet knowledge that we could be together without needing to rush or justify it. Afterward, we walked slowly, past streets that had once felt ordinary but now seemed mapped with memory. She reached for my hand, not abruptly, but with the casual intimacy of two people who had weathered uncertainty and emerged still curious about each other. I didn't grip tightly, didn't pull, just let it rest there, light and certain. Back in her kitchen later, she brewed tea again. I lingered by the counter, pretending to examine a book, while she moved through the motions of the day. Small gestures, her fingers brushing the rim of the cup, the soft exhale she let out when she poured the water, spoke more than words ever could. We ate quietly, shared laughter over an unremarkable story, and for the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel weighted. It felt shared, comfortable, like a language we had learned without realizing it. As I left that evening, she stood at the doorway, hair catching the last light of the setting sun. "See you tomorrow?" she asked. Not a question, really, more a thread tying the day to the next. I nodded. Tomorrow. Walking home, I realized that the longing, the hesitation, the stolen moments, all of it, hadn't disappeared. But it had transformed. It was no longer a quiet ache of uncertainty. It was warmth, anchored in routine, small habits, and the simple understanding that some love doesn't need declarations. It just needs space to grow in the quiet corners of ordinary life. That night, as I sipped black coffee and glanced at my phone, I thought of the bench, the fountain, and the clock at 8:47 a.m. A smile tugged at my lips. She'd understand why I noticed, why I remembered. And that, I realized, was enough.